KCBS News Time, 8:30.
You're listening to KCBS In Depth.
Everyone is facing these huge life-changing moments.
The people, places, and issues the Bay Area is talking about.
I think it really is important for folks to reach out to people so they can know that they're not alone.
We don't know how long all of this is going to go on for. And from an emotional standpoint, psychologically, that's a really difficult thing to grapple with.
This is KCBS In Depth.
Survivor, and I'm grateful to be a survivor,
After decades of shame and hurt, the head of a major South Bay homeless shelter group is now speaking up about her own experience with homelessness during her teenage years.
I'm lucky that I had some of the skills and some of the resiliency and obviously some support to get through growing up and the ordeals I encountered.
Hello and welcome to KCBS In Depth. I'm Keith Menconi, and today we're bringing you a conversation with Andrea Urton, the CEO of Home First Services, who recently came forward with her story. We'll discuss what she wants more people to understand about what it means to be homeless.
I wanted to break down some of that blame and shame that many of our unhoused neighbors walk around with.
Then, in the second half of the program, the challenges that Urton faced while she was growing up have tragically not gone away. In fact, over the past year, they seem to have only gotten worse.
Our young people are in need of our attention, they're in need of our support, and they're in need of the financial resources.
We'll take a closer look up ahead on KCBS In Depth. First, though, we're going to get to know the woman who runs one of the largest shelter groups in the South Bay. A warning to those who might be sensitive: this first section includes references to sexual abuse.
We can come back into the lobby and I can walk you around the shelter.
All right, that'd be good.
I met up recently with Andrea Urton, again the CEO of Home First Services, at one of the group's San Jose homeless shelters.
So when people check in, they get a meal ticket, a blanket, and a bed number.
It's just one of several facilities that she oversees as the head of a shelter network that on any given night houses thousands of people throughout Santa Clara County.
Thank you guys, I appreciate your time today. You too. Bye. Have a great day.
Urton, now 53, spends much of her workdays busy with meetings, making plans for new shelter sites and services, and fielding phone calls with city and county officials as she helps to coordinate the emergency rehousing effort launched in response to the pandemic. She's come a long way from her troubled childhood, which she spent in poverty growing up outside of L.A. Her difficulties began early in life. Urton says that when she was only 9 years old, her mother lost a 7-year battle with a chronic illness. Her passing meant that Urton was left in the sole care of her father, a man who she says was prone to violent outbursts and perhaps she believes suffered from undiagnosed mental illness.
And so he drank. He was physically abusive, and he was sexually abusive with me. And when Mother died, things escalated.
And they continued to escalate for several years. The situation finally came to a head one night when Urton was 15 and her father once again threatened her physically. This time, though, she fought back.
I had been working out and was very physically strong, and I went nuts, and I just started punching as hard as I could.
She managed to fight him off, and that became the first time that she ran away from home.
I was gone for a while, couch surfed. I had a network of girlfriends with single mothers, and so was very lucky. They never really asked any questions. I think they knew. Looking back, they must have known.
What followed for Urton was a 4-year period of sporadic homelessness, filled with long nights spent alone and vulnerable.
I slept in my car, and ended up renting a room at a Navy flop house, which was not a pleasant ordeal. I had to keep the door locked and the windows and curtains shut because the men would get drunk at night and try to come in.
Despite all that life had to throw at her, Urton managed to persevere, eventually going on to complete her education, after which she worked for many years as a therapist, then later as an administrator, and finally in 2015, she landed the CEO spot at Home First.
It felt like my life had come full circle.
Full circle because, as she goes about her work, she understands the difference a shelter room could have made in her own life.
I would have been safe. I would have been off the street. I wouldn't have been at risk for sexual assault any further. And I would have been able to finish my studies earlier because I wouldn't have had to work multiple jobs. It could have just been one full-time job.
The trauma of her teenage years still lingers, but recently, Urton decided to share details of her story with the Mercury News. She says she did so in part to let others who have faced similar struggles know that they are not alone. Meantime, though, she also has a message for those who have never experienced homelessness. We are going to discuss that message further now. Once again, we're speaking with Andrea Urton of Home First Services. This is KCBS In Depth.
So talking about the timing for coming forward with this experience and sharing it with the South Bay community, obviously we are in the midst of major transitions, major efforts over the last year to get as many unhoused people into temporary shelters, into permanent shelters as possible, and there is this big question hanging in the air of how permanent will these efforts be, and a lot of that is going to be determined by the decisions made at the local level, people deciding, do I want the shelter in my community, do I want it to stay here, do I want whatever other development that is supportive housing, whatnot, do I want that to stay here? So there are a lot of big decisions that are going to be made in the months and years ahead. I wonder if that was a motivating factor for you at all in bringing your own experience to light.
It was in the fact that I wanted to normalize what it means to be unhoused for people. If they could see someone that looks like me, middle-aged, white woman, slightly chubby, I could be, an old teacher, I could be a current teacher, I could be a family friend, a family member, any of those things. And if they could look at me and hear me articulate my story and understand that I'm an educated woman and it happened to me, then I'm hoping that people can shift their perspectives from a shame and blame and fear position, which I understand the fear. I'm not shaming or blaming people either, but to a position of let's do what we have to do to take the most vulnerable people in our community and let's get them the solutions they need to help them resolve their issues permanently. And that's going to be a wide array of services because people come to the table with different backgrounds and different problems, different challenges. So we need to offer a wide array of solutions, everything from drug and alcohol treatment to mental health to board and care facilities that we don't have enough beds for, to emergency interim housing and bridge housing and permanent supportive housing and affordable housing. We need all of those services. And in the interim, we need safe encampments because there has to be a safe place for people to go with dignity now. Well, we put those other measures in place. This will also help clean up our communities. So it really is a win-win. It does everything for everyone. And I know at the end of the day, that's what our community wants. They want a safe, clean, dignified place where they can live and our unhoused neighbors can live too.
And I think another aspect of your story that may be striking to some is that when folks think about homelessness, they have a particular picture in their head about what homelessness looks like. They may think of encampments in particular, or they may think of shelters. You had a very precarious housing situation that took many different forms over the course of your homelessness, and that's fairly typical of many people's experiences.
It is, and it's very typical of young adults as well. But it is, many people are in and out of homelessness briefly because they don't make enough money to really end their issue by getting an apartment. It costs anywhere between $3,500 to $5,000 to rent an apartment in this valley. And if you're working at Subway or as a janitor or a receptionist, where do you save that kind of money?
Yeah, so hence the precariousness that many people find themselves in. Now, I do make the mistake sometimes of reading the comments underneath newspaper articles, and so I do have some vantage point on the skepticism that many residents come to the topic of homelessness with. Also spoken to many Bay Area residents about this topic, and there is a lot of skepticism, especially engendered by the fact that this is an issue that's been around for so long. There's been so much effort stood up to confront the problem of homelessness, and yet still it is here with us. And I can imagine a lot of folks that are coming at this topic with that mindset. I can imagine them thinking, well, all right, Andrea Urton, her story is fairly sympathetic. She had the whole world come down on her at a young age and had to fight her way through that. And so, feeling sympathy for that young person struggling through those life difficulties, it's easy to muster that sympathy. But what about the people for whom, perhaps they were given opportunities that were squandered or are in less sympathetic situations? So what do you say to the resident who's wrestling through those thoughts?
I say that we are born and cultivate certain levels of resiliency, each single one of us as human beings. I am very lucky. When I tested on a scale of resiliency, I've got 20 plus factors. All right?
There you go.
That's a lot. So not everybody has that. Somebody might have one. Somebody might have three. And what if that individual is doing the best they can with what they have? So let's take somebody by the name of John. Maybe John was caring for his ill mother, never really been very good at holding down a job, and not educated, doesn't really have an education, dropped out of high school. So he's got nothing to fall back on. His mother dies and he loses the house. He's now homeless with no skills. Is that really John's fault? And how do we support John?
Yeah. And crucially, we don't get to choose how resilient we are.
Right. So, if you have a high intellect and a sense of humor and are resourceful and able to reach out for help and mentorship, you have a high likelihood that you will succeed. If you don't have those things, you might struggle more.
So what are you hoping that folks who listen to your story in the months ahead, given all the difficult decisions that are coming up, what do you hope that they take away from it?
I'm hoping that they build empathy for other people's situations. I hope that they're able to look at the fear that they hold, understandably so, around the issue of homelessness, around the issue of our unhoused neighbors. It's scary to look at somebody who's living on the street. In the back of our minds, I think many of us think it could be me, so they don't want to deal with it. However, if we hit this head on, it's taken us many generations, by the way, to create this problem. With the redevelopment agencies not building the housing because they're no longer around, so we don't have affordable housing to lean on, and all of a sudden we've got all these people who need it. It's only going to get worse if we don't dive in full force now. And that means putting these things in people's neighborhoods. That means putting housing solutions. But the question is, they're already homeless in your neighborhood to begin with. Why not house them in your neighborhood? Now your neighborhood is safe for everyone. And I know that's a scary concept, but it can be done and can be done well because it is happening.
Yeah. And I suppose the flip side of all of this is the march out of homelessness that you successfully made, and you and other homeless advocates would say many other people could make.